So I wanted to welcome everybody tonight. My name is Allison Henline, not Shaker History. I forgot to rename myself, but my name is Allison Henline, and I am the Education and Outreach Manager here at the Shaker Historical Society. And tonight I am joined by Sara Fisher, who is the Director of the International Women, Air, and Space Museum. Yes, I got it right. Okay. Sara is the Executive Director at the International Women's Air and Space Museum, located in downtown Cleveland inside the Burke Lakefront Airport. She's going to be giving us a wonderful talk tonight about Soaring Above, Cleveland in Women, Aviation, and Aerospace. I want to remind everybody that this is going to be recorded, and we are also streaming it on our Facebook live page, which is just Shaker History. So if you wanted to attend it there, and we ask that anybody that has any questions or comments throughout this presentation, please feel free to comment them in the box below, or answer them into the Zoom chat, because we do have some people on the Zooms as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it on over to Sara.
All right, awesome. Let me just go ahead and get the screen shared here and make sure it's the right document, since I have like 50 open, because that is my life these days. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you to the Shaker Historical Society for inviting us with the International Women's Air and Space Museum to speak this evening. As Allison said, we are the International Women's Air and Space Museum, located inside Burke Lakefront Airport in downtown Cleveland. So we are right on the lake. We are, a stone's throw from our friends at the Great Lakes Science Center and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and all of the wonderful organizations that make up downtown. So I joke that the International Women's Air and Space Museum is the best kept secret of Cleveland and also Ohio in general. We are a nonprofit museum whose mission is to collect, preserve, and showcase the history and culture of women in all areas of aviation and aerospace. We educate people of the world about their contributions and inspire future generations by bringing the history to life. Well, it helps if I know how to also advance the slides. Woo! There's our mission again, because I forgot I typed it up. So an easy way to think about what we do is we preserve, educate, and inspire folks of all ages about the impact of women in aviation and aerospace. We participate in programs just like this with partner organizations, colleges and universities, and also corporations. But we also have physical displays at the museum, which are open 7 days a week. And our offices are open Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. To 4 p.m. for researchers, guided tours, and for general questions. IWASM, as we like to call ourselves, hosts a variety of events, including an annual free family day, our Dinner with a Slice of History speakers program made possible by Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, Rocket Day in partnership with NASA's Glenn Research Center, and our annual WOW, or Wings of Women STEM conference for high school girls. Recently, we've also been in the process of adding some more virtual experiences and content so we can really bring history to you, our communities. You can see here, this is, I'll talk about Catherine in a hot second, because we can't talk about the history of women in aviation and aerospace without mentioning the Wright sister. But we have exhibits at the museum on Amelia Earhart, Bessie Coleman, the first African-American woman to earn her pilot's license, the Mercury 13, as well as the WASP. We have a wall of all of the women who have been to space, which we're quickly running out of room, which is a wonderful thing to be able to celebrate there. We do have some upcoming virtual and free programs in April. Our first one is going to be April 7th, behind the collections door, the Mercury 13, where we will explore some of our collections items that aren't currently on display that help to tell the story of these remarkable 13 women who secretly underwent the same physiological tests as the Mercury astronauts. You may have heard of some of these guys, John Glenn, Ellen Shepard, Gus Grissom, all of them. So that is going to be on the 7th. On April 13th, we have Mercury Women, The Forgotten Link to the Future, in partnership with our friends at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum down in Wapakoneta, Ohio. We will explore more in-depth the story of the Mercury 13, including, B. Stedman, Wally Funk, and the rest. We will also discuss how it took more than 20 years for the first American woman to visit space, when in 1983, Sally Ride went up in the shuttle missions. On the 22nd, we are also going to be participating in Lakeland Community College's Unladylike 2021 series, where we will dive into the lasting impact of trailblazer Bessie Coleman. As I said, the first African-American woman to earn her pilot's license. We will place Bessie into the historical context and how she influenced those who followed, including Dorothy Darby, who we will be highlighting later in this program. But you can find out more information about our events and everything if you visit our website, which is right here on the bottom right of the screen, and go to our events page. We have all the information there. So tonight, Shaker Historical Society asked us to hone in on Cleveland women and their role in air and space. But before we really dig into Cleveland specific history, we felt that it's important to understand the history of just the field of aviation and the field of aerospace, so we can really understand this lasting impact that these women had. So tonight we're just going to, graze the very tip of the iceberg that is women's history in aviation and aerospace. How did Cleveland play into all of this? And hopefully we'll have something for everyone to learn and enjoy and want to learn more about down the road. So as Allison said, if you do have questions, please put it in the comment section. If you're joining us from Facebook, put it in the chat box. If you're joining us from Zoom, we'd love to engage. So to begin, it's important to note that fascination with air travel and lighter than air isn't something that's really unique to the 20th century or even the 21st century or even Ohio, even though, Ohio has certainly led the way in many respects in innovation, research, and, successful races. You may be surprised to note that at the same time that Orv and Wilbur, you know them as the Wright brothers, were tinkering in their bicycle shop in Dayton, other innovators were experimenting as well with air travel. One notable American was actually financially backed by the US government for his research, but I'm going to let that be like a teaser for a little bit later in tonight's program. We also can't truly understand, or we can't really get underway this evening without mentioning Catherine Wright. She was arguably the unsung character of Orv and Will's success. She was the only sister of the Wright brothers. Educated at Oberlin College, suffragist, publicist for her brothers, and she even helped to operate the bicycle shop when her brothers were in Kitty Hawk with the other brother, Lauren. You can see Catherine here in the bottom left of the screen. To understand the history of aviation and aerospace, it's also important to understand that there are two key differences. The term aviation refers to activities within Earth's atmosphere. Aerospace refers to the study and activities outside Earth's atmosphere, but they all play on one another. Historically speaking, there is an account of Elizabeth Tibble becoming the first woman in a lighter than air activity as far back as 1784. That's just hard to believe. Though this was before the Industrial Revolution and before famed mathematician and human computer Ada Lovelace was even born. Elizabeth flew before 1815, before Ada Lovelace was even born. This image on the right is a drawing of that particular event in 1784. In 1798, Jean Labrosse was the first woman to solo a balloon. You might not know this, our Civil War buffs, but during the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, the Union Army actually used balloons for aerial reconnaissance with the use of the Balloon Corps. This corps was used to spy on the Confederate Army during the Peninsular Campaign, Island Number 10, Savannah Campaign, as well as the Battle of Chancellorsville. So a lot of what we saw happening in early aviation was dealing with balloon travel. In 1880, Mary Myers became the first American woman to solo a balloon. By 1903 and the Wright brothers' experiments, Samuel Langley, the Smithsonian secretary at the time, had received $100,000 from the War Department to run similar experiments as the Wrights. However, the history of aeronautical advances really took off during the 19 teens, especially during World War I. By this time, European nations had invested government money to develop and build on the Wrights of research to develop new and improved aircraft as part of the war effort on the continent. So yet another reason why World War I is considered the first modern war. So why is this all important? Many of aviation's early female pioneers were inspired and fascinated by the advances of technology and early male pilots' achievements. The International Women's Air and Space Museum has a whole other program that we do where we explore and examine the wider history of women in air and space. But this evening, I've been given a task. We're going to look at Cleveland. So let's start looking at Cleveland. By 1920, the idea of an air show or air race came to the States with European Joseph Pulitzer and found its way to Cleveland in 1929. So why Cleveland? According to our friends at the Cleveland National Air Show, they note that there is a direct tie to the significance of local civic, municipal, industrial, and military support here in Cleveland. It's also important to note the establishment of Hopkins Airport 4 years earlier in 1925. The show consisted of various demonstrations, parachutist jumping, and even closed course pylon races and cross-country races. If you saw the event photograph for tonight's program, it's actually showing Louise Thaden, Ohioan and winner of the 1929 Women's Cross Country Air Derby. Odds are that many of you haven't heard of the Derby, or you may know it by its nickname, the Powderpuff Derby. One account says or articulates that this name Powderpuff came from a reporter who noticed that as the women who themselves were mechanics, they worked on their own planes, and flying at the time was really messy, would actually land at the various checkpoints, at which point some could be seen applying their facial powder to cover up the grease and dirt from flying. So in 1929, during this women's cross-country air derby, during the Powderpuff Derby, a group of daring women took off from Santa Monica, California for a cross-country race ending where else? Here in Cleveland. On August 26, 1929, 20 women crossed the finish line. A name everyone should recognize, Amelia Earhart, placed 7th overall. However, Cleveland native Blanche Noyes placed 4th. Immediately before entering the Derby, Noyes had actually first soloed a plane in February of 29, and then got her pilot's license in July. So she turned right back around and signed up for the Derby. The races actually ended in the 1960s after a crash of a P-51 Mustang in Berea that was actually owned by Jackie Cochran. We can do a whole program on Jackie Cochran down the road, but that just kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of the impact of women in the early years of these air races and of these air derbies. Noyes went on to become a demonstrations pilot, let me go back here, for Standard Oil in 1931 and continued flying with other corporations until 1935. She joined the Air Marketing Group of the Bureau of Air Commerce in 1936 and later became a member of the Women's Auxiliary Committee on Aeronautics. She even joined Louise Thaden as co-pilot in the 1936 Bendix Trophy race. During the 1930s, another Clevelander, Helen Curtis, worked with a real estate firm and spent her free time flying. In 1938, she joined another Clevelander, Florence Boswell, on a flight from Florida to Cuba, traveling over 4,000 miles. According to Curtis, quote, "When you get thousands of feet up in the air and look down, you realize how little you matter in the world." Curtis was an active member of the 99s, an international organization for women pilots, of which Amelia Earhart was their first president. And we can actually thank some of our founding as an organization to a subcommittee of the 99s who helped found us, the International Women's Air and Space Museum, 45 years ago. Curtis served as the All Ohio 99s president in 1939. Florence Boswell was born in Cleveland on May 4th, 1894, and graduated from St. Luke's Hospital Training School in 1918 as a nurse. She was inspired to fly after making regular trips to Put-in-Bay during the summers when her sons attended camp. Boswell took her first flying lesson on November 16th, 1935, and by December, she completed her first solo flight. She then went on to earn a limited commercial pilot's license, transport pilot's license, and non-scheduled instrument rating, becoming only the fourth woman in the world to earn that particular rating at the time. During World War II, she served as captain of the Company B, 5th Division of the Aerial Nurse Corps, which was actually founded by fellow Ohioan Loretta Schmoller from Bucyrus in the 1930s. In 1942, she served as second lieutenant of the Civil Air Patrol. So one figure that I personally love learning about and want to share her story with anyone and everyone who will listen is that of Dorothy Darby. Born in Cleveland in or around 1909, that date is, we have some conflicting accounts of when she was actually born. She earned various nicknames throughout her career. She was a parachutist and pilot and was inspired to fly by Bessie Coleman, the first African-American woman to earn her pilot's license, and an inspiration to many people of color and women who dreamed of pursuing a career in aviation. One of Darby's first exhibitions was actually during a flyover in honor of Coleman after Coleman's untimely death in 1926 in a plane crash. In newspapers from 1932 to 1935, she is listed as the Brown Bomber or the Brown Devil in the Sky. Side note here, like through the research we've done at the museum, we can do a whole program and might actually get one on the books soon that discusses just how women are referred to in newspapers compared to male aviators. So that's just something we're looking into there. But little is known about Darby. But we do know that Dorothy Darby studied at Curtis Wright Aeronautical University in Chicago and made her first parachute jump in 1932. Darby found success during air shows and exhibitions while tackling the double burden of both sex and race. One article we actually have here on the right-hand side of the screen describes her during this one particular show in Chattanooga that she made a parachute leap from a plane 1 mile high and landed in the Tennessee River. However, differing accounts do have her listed as being born in Detroit, but we know from multiple sources she was born in Cleveland. So we're happy to call her a Clevelander. Arlene Davis, some say, is the First Lady of Aviation. She was born here in Cleveland in 1899 and early in her career participated in various air races and competitions. During the Great Depression, she served with the National Aeronautics Association, an organization for which she served as a director until her death. During World War II, she was commissioned as a lieutenant in intelligence in the Civil Air Patrol, named chairperson of the Wing Scouts of the Girl Scouts of America, and also trained Army and Navy cadets in flying. During World War II, the Cleveland Bomber Plant was built in 1942, but was known through most of its history as the Cleveland Tank Plant. Owned by the War Department during World War II, the facility was operated by General Motors as the Fisher Body Aircraft Plant Number 2 and made the B-29 bomber. In its heyday, the plant employed 15,000 workers. On March 21st, not sure how many of you know this, but March 21st was actually National Rosie the Riveter Day. So if you know a Rosie, you want to learn more about Rosies, let us know. We're happy to share their stories. And I can certainly talk for days about Rosie the Riveter. But the Women Air Force Service Pilots, or WASP, were the first women to fly military aircraft. However, they were not part of the military themselves. Formed by Jackie Cochran, holder of many air race titles and the first woman to break the sound barrier, these WASP were tasked with ferrying military aircraft like the B-29 Super Fortress to the various Army air bases. This was all before the formation of the U.S. Air Force as a separate branch of the military. At the museum, we have a roster of WASP from 1945, so about a year or so after the WASP were officially disbanded. But in it, since it was so shortly after the war, we know that Northeast Ohio and the greater Cleveland area was well represented in the WASP. Some of these women included Ruth Adams of South Euclid, Betty Beckold from Willoughby, Grace Burge from Cleveland, Martha Blair from Lakewood, Margaret Hurlburt from Painesville, and Mary Regalbuto. I think I just butchered that name. I'm so sorry. From Cleveland. While there have been many studies and programs and acknowledgments of the WASP, they were not the only ones who had a hand in both the war and in aviation. One Clevelander, Lillian Hewick, was working as a long-distance telephone operator when she saw a poster recruiting women to join the war effort during World War II. Hewick joined the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, or the WAC, and trained in Des Moines, Iowa. After training, she was stationed at the Patterson Army Airfield in Dayton. Many of you might recognize that name if you are familiar with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and the National Museum of the United States Air Force, which is on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base down in Dayton. As part of the alert crew, Hewick fueled airplanes on the base. She was often used for promotion photos and was voted, quote, Queen of the WAC, according to one report. WAC units were used to, quote, free a man to fight during World War II. So what Lillian demonstrates is that there were different ways that women served. Could be Rosies, could be WASPs, could be a part of the WAC. But the women who were part of the WAC were not just pilots, or they weren't pilots themselves, but they contributed to the war effort in that way. So I mentioned earlier that during the early decades of the 20th century, European countries had invested significantly their government monies into research and development and new technologies. They were developing some better planes early on in early aviation history. One scholar argued that various European governments invested heavily in the technology, and the result was that their airplanes far outstripped American capabilities by the time of World War I, so by 1914. While the US government had invested $100,000 in Langley's research, he was ultimately unsuccessful, which caused some to question the real need to invest in such research and development if the American ingenuity would prevail, since the Wrights hadn't had government funding. By 1914, when the First World War broke out, Smithsonian Secretary Walcott noted that there were a total of only 1,400 military aircraft in existence, and the US had 23. So what does this mean for the history of the 20th and 21st century in Cleveland and women and all of that? If you paid attention to any of our social studies and history classes, we know that war can be good for innovation and development of new technologies. Controversial statement, I know. In 1941, NASA's Glenn Research Center was established by the National Advisory Committee to be part of the Aircraft Engine Research Laboratory. It was later renamed the Lewis Research Center and part of the newly formed National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, in 1958. And then in 1999, it was renamed yet again for Ohio-born John Glenn as the John H. Glenn Research Center at Lewis Field. At NASA Glenn, the research done shifted from engine efficiency and advancement during the war to that of high energy rocket propellants and nuclear propulsion during the 1950s. And who can tell me what was also happening during the 1950s and 60s and 70s? Rhetorical question, but if you said the Cold War and the space race, you got it. Which brings us to Annie Easley. In 1958, another Ohio boy, Neil Armstrong, began his NASA career actually as a test pilot at Lewis. But I would wager that many of you didn't know the name Annie Easley. Easley played numerous important roles over her more than 30 years at NASA. The same year that Neil Armstrong began his career as a test pilot, Easley worked out calculations for researchers by hand and relied on tables and large computing machines to fulfill her work. All of this at the same time Armstrong began, like I said. Well, might help if I'm looking at the right page. Okay, there we go. While at NASA Glenn, she began as a human computer specializing in mathematical computations. As computing machines became prevalent, she became a math technician and a programmer. She was best known for the software that contributed to the Centaur upper stage rockets, which launched space probes to Mars and the outer solar system and helped lay the foundation for NASA's space shuttles. Easley also studied energy applications, including batteries, solar, and wind, and gave back to her community in meaningful ways. So fast forward to later in the 20th century and into the 21st century, where NASA Glenn was an integral part of the Columbia accident investigation. In 2018, the Orion spacecraft for Artemis 1 was tested at this space power facility. And this program will land the first woman and the next man on Earth's moon and is aptly named for the Greek god Apollo's twin sister, Artemis. So we would actually also be remiss if we didn't give a shout out to current NASA Glenn director, Dr. Marlo Perez-Davis. In 2020, she was named the center's newest director, making her the first Puerto Rican-born woman to lead it, and only the second woman to lead the facility. On March 17th, just last week, mind you, I encourage you to check out our Facebook page. We've shared out the article. It's a wonderful article about her. She's quoted as saying the first time she was going to share that with one of her teachers, that she wanted to be a chemical engineer, the reaction was not what she expected. The reaction was, why do you want to be a chemical engineer? Well, because I like chemistry and I like math. And she said, the response was, well, that's a male field. That's not for a woman. So the article even features Dr. Perez-Davis with Wally Funk, member of the Mercury 13, the first group of women who secretly underwent astronaut testing beginning in 1961 during her visit to Iwasam a couple of years ago. So history is made every day. Current events are made, they become history quickly. And, I know this was it was a quick overview. I promised a tip of the iceberg. But while we can go on, and some of our volunteers have even suggested that we offer like a master class on just the history of women in aviation and the history of women in aerospace and looking at the different time periods, we just wanted to take a glance at what are some of the notable Cleveland women and their contributions to the field of aviation and the field of aerospace. The International Women's Air and Space Museum, we have a whole traveling exhibit that is 100 Ohio women in air and space, which we are in the process of updating. And we're constantly having to update this because there are constantly new women breaking those barriers and setting records and everything. So if we even widen our radius to Ohio women's history in air and space, we could talk about astronauts Judy Resnick. We could talk about astronaut Dr. Kathy Sullivan, pioneer Jerry Mock. So women have been part of the history of aviation and aerospace from the beginning, even before our typical understanding of aviation being planes or helicopters even. They played different roles throughout the almost 120 years of organized research and development. So we have actually quite a few minutes for questions. I've seen some things, some notifications pop up, at least on the Zoom side of things. But I have here on this screen, if you have questions, email us at our info@iwasm.org. So our team, we check that every single day, multiple times a day, and we're happy to answer any research questions. You can come visit our exhibits 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., Sunday through Saturday. And we have our offices open for research 10 to 4, Monday through Friday. And like I said at the very beginning, we do have those events coming up that are really looking at the history of the Mercury 13 and their lasting impact on the space program and changes in technology. So thank you so much for tuning in. It was a very short, sweet, and to the point this evening. But Allison, what questions do we have?
I actually can't see any in the Zoom chat. I refreshed it a couple times, so I don't know if they were just directed at you or not. But I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Sara and to the International Women's Air and Space Museum for giving us this wonderful presentation tonight. I certainly learned a lot about some of the amazing female pilots and, I love the name Aviatrix. I think that's just such a cool name. So I personally really enjoyed that. But I'm struggling to see any comments on my end. Oh, I just have one from Walter Kiefer who asks, how long did the Powderpuff races take place, and did they impact the WASP and WAC members?
That is an excellent question. So we have contemporary folks who have been on our board, who are volunteers, who are members of our organization, who they themselves participated in the Powderpuff. So there have been races throughout the entire 20th century that women participated in those, who they're still around with us. They've earned titles, they've set records. So in terms of an impact on the WASP and the WAC or the WAF, so many of them continued on as pilots. If you look at, not necessarily Cleveland, but if you look at the Mercury 13, all of them were pilots that were training. That's a tune in on April 7th and the 13th for more information on the Mercury 13. But many continued on as pilots. They were pilots before the war, and they were pilots after. So I think it's not a did it just end? I think it's part of the identity of female pilots. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, it's very interesting. Just from our Facebook comments, we have from Karen, who said she shared this, and she said that she actually knew Annie, but that the comment just says it's a wonderful and great to have this during Women's History Month, which I agree with. I think this alignment made sense for everybody involved, especially with you as the Women's Air and Space Museum.
Yep.
It's just amazing to hear all these very inspirational stories, and it's, I think, especially poignant now more than ever. But if anybody else has any other questions or comments, feel free to ask them. But I think unless you have anything else to say, I mean, you plugged all of your stuff, but if you want to run through the list again of any upcoming events that you might have, feel free to do so.
Yeah, let me actually unshare my screen real quick so you don't get the whiplash from me frantically scrolling to the right slide here of some of our upcoming events. So let me reshare this here. All right, so slideshow.
There
Okay,
you
there
go.
we go. I understand technology. It's great. Yeah, so here we have our upcoming events that we have in April. Like I said, it's heavy on the Mercury 13, which this is the 60th anniversary of the start of Mercury 13 testing. They started testing in 1961. So it's appropriate for us to really share their story. And there are only two of these remarkable women still with us now. So we have our program on Behind the Collections Door, the Mercury 13, on April 7th at 3 p.m. So that we're doing in partnership with California Aeronautical University, actually, their Department of Student Life. On April 13th with the Armstrong Air and Space Museum, we are going to take a deeper dive into the legacy and who the Mercury 13 really were and who they continue to be and inspire. And on April 22nd, we will be participating with Lakeland Community College's Unladylike 2021 series, looking at the legacy of Bessie Coleman. And we have Concha Reed from NASA's Glenn Research Center also on like our two-person panel to really talk about the legacy of Bessie Coleman and taking that history all the way up to Meryl Tengsdahl. So that is at 12 noon. All of these programs are free. They are virtual. You can tune in. If you just want to, call in, if you want to join by Zoom, we have all these different opportunities. So check out our events page for that, for more information.
Awesome. Those sound very fascinating. I'm probably going to attend a couple of those. That's because I'm personally interested. But everyone wants to say how much they appreciated your presentation in the chat. Jerry asks, does the museum have any clubs and or affiliations with any of the colleges or high schools?
So we've been building relationships with many different organizations and many different with colleges, universities, high schools, everything like that. We do have our Wings of Women, our WOW conference that we host normally every November. Unfortunately, 2020 with the pandemic and everything, we had to cancel it, but it is on for 2021 because I am bound and determined to have it for 2021. We're figuring out how it's going to be laid out. But that is a program for high school girls to encourage them to explore STEM and really get to meet some wonderful mentors within the field. We have a brand new relationship, like I said, with California Aeronautical University. That is something they actually are hosting one of our traveling exhibits right now on the Mercury 13. So that's where like a lot of this programming just kind of popped up out of. So we have relationships with Cleveland State, one of our local universities. We've had a number of wonderful volunteers and interns come out of Cleveland State, as well as Kent State University as well, and Case. And we are always excited to build new relationships and partnerships to help support other organizations and also to see how we can collaborate.
Definitely. I think that's a huge thing moving forward for a lot of historical institutions is collaboration and, tying our historical missions to people, especially young people everywhere. I think that's, the way forward for us historical institutions anyways. Bonnie says that a good read is Fly Girls. It covers a lot of the women pilots that you had mentioned. And she also says, thank you for a great presentation.
Yes, bowing down to Keith O'Brien and his wonderful book. Yes. Yeah, I highly recommend Fly Girls. It talks about the Powderpuff. We have some in our gift shop for sale. And before everything happened, I'm just gonna say before 2020 happened, we were fortunate to have Keith agree to come and be one of our presenters for our Dinner with a Slice of History program. But his event unfortunately fell like during lockdown, so we had to cancel it, but I'm looking forward to reaching back out, seeing if he's still interested in being a presenter. But yes, Fly Girls is a wonderful book. I will say, if you're wanting to learn more about many of these remarkable women that we highlighted and others, if you go to our website, iwasm.org, which is still here on this page, and you go to the shop tab, it'll take you to our e-gift shop, where you can see what books we have, to learn about the first North Carolina woman to earn her pilot's license, to read about Sally Ride, to hear in Wally Funk's own words her desire to be an astronaut. She was the youngest of all of the Mercury women. So she's a hoot. We love her. And if you want to learn more, check out our website. We have a lot of resources, and you can check out our gift shop if you're looking for something to read.
Awesome plugs. Okay, well, I think that that's all we have tonight. Again, I wanted to say a huge thank you again to Sara and the International Women's Air and Space Museum for spending this time with us tonight, and for everybody that has been in the chat or is watching this live now, or a week, a month, a year, or down the line from now. Thank you so much for spending your time here with us tonight on this beautiful Thursday evening here in Northeast Ohio. And be sure to check out all these upcoming events at the International Women's Air and Space Museum, and keep an eye out, SHS members, on your emails, because we're going to be sending out a newsletter about our upcoming events in April, which are going to be solidified by the end of this week, which is tomorrow. So, but thank you again, Sara, for everything. And thank you all for joining us. If you missed any portion of it, it will be available on our Facebook page, which is Shaker History, or facebook.com/Shaker History. And it will also be available on our YouTube page, which is just Shaker History. You just type it in on YouTube. But thank you again, Sara, and thank you everybody for being here.
Yes, thank you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. And thank you so much for tuning in.
Yep. And we'll catch you guys all on the flip side. So thank you so much, and we'll see you later.